it got me thinking about moving. And as I shared with the children, during my college days, I worked for a moving company. So I moved a lot of people, more than I care to count. I have touched and went upstairs and moved more boxes than I care to count. And after college, I had the experience of working for a moving company, as well as I had, I believe, the only pickup truck around. So you can see I was very popular when it came time for anyone to load a truck or move. Now, if you have ever moved yourself, you will notice that there are two types of people who help you move. And they can be family members, friends, or professionals. It doesn't matter. The first are the lifters. Okay? The lifters, they're the ones that come in and they just start grabbing stuff. Heavy stuff. And they're carrying it out to the truck. And they're grabbing boxes and furniture or whatever that needs to be moved. And you don't even have to say, they're just, what's next? What's next? And they're just going at a fast pace. The second type of people are the leaners. You know the leaners? They're there, they're talking, they're kind of leaning on the furniture that needs to be moved. Or the boxes that need to be carried out. And on moving day, if it's you know what type of people you want to invite. And same holds true in our relationships. Two types of people. There's leaders who add weight and stress to our lives. And then there's lifters who encourage us, who lessen our load, who help us move forward, who help us carry our burden. And I strongly believe what is true in our personal life also holds true in the life of any faith community as well. And that's the point, that it's impossible to live up to our greatest potential that we can never be. We can never be all God wants us to be if we are totally surrounded by leaders. There's a case study, perfect case study in the Old Testament, which illustrates this very point. It's about a guy named David. As I said before, King David. So if you will, turn to me to 1 Samuel chapter 18. And as you're turning, I want to give you a little bit of background. If you remember the story, God's chosen people, the Israelites, desperately wanted a king after Moses delivered them out of Egypt. So God anointed King Saul to be their king. You need to understand that King Saul was a man's man. He was taller, he was physically superior, he was exactly what you would want your king to look like. But the problem with Saul was he kind of had this paranoia schizophrenia, if you will, if you study his life. He was always in this off-again, on-again relationship with God and his people. One day Saul was all in, one day he was out. And finally, after this on-again, off-again, God decides to pick a new king, to anoint someone else to be king. So God anoints David to be king after Saul passes away. In the previous chapters, in chapters 16 and 17, and I encourage you to go read that later if you will, to kind of rehash that. That's the story about David killing Goliath, which we've all heard before. But if you notice, if you reread that, you notice where's Saul in that story. Saul's hiding in a tent. When the Goliath comes out each day, Saul, the king, is hiding in the tent. You see, Goliath was Saul's battle, not David's. And you know the story, the slingshot, the rock, David kills Goliath. But instantly, David, this little runt of a shepherd boy that no one had ever heard of, instantly, this ultimate underdog Rocky story, instantly, with the fall of that giant, David becomes a national hero. So instead of letting David go back to his father Jesse in Bethlehem, Saul says, David, you come back to the palace and live with me. Kind of, let's keep our friends close, but our enemies closer. And that is where we pick up the story this morning. So if you will, turn with me to 1 Samuel chapter 18, beginning with the 6th verse. And when the men were returning home, after David had killed the Philistine, Goliath, to go on this amazing cruise, this amazing family vacation. You return, and you go up to someone you know, and they say, "Hey, how was your trip?" And you're like, "Oh, it was awesome. It was awesome. Let me show you." And you get out your phone, and you start showing it. Here we are on the beach, and here, look, they made little animals on our bed. And look, and here's this. And their response is, "Wish I could go on the cruise. I got to work all the time." You see, that's a symptom, because that's not an appropriate emotional response. That's a system of an unhealthy person. You're telling them about this amazing time you had with your family because they asked, and they turn around and make it all about them. And Paul says that in Romans 12:15. He said, "Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep." We're to be glad. We're to be glad when others are glad. And we're to be sad when others are sad. Those are appropriate emotional response. Leaders do just the opposite. When we rejoice, they mourn. Verse 10. The next day, an evil spirit from God came forcibly on Saul. He was prophesying in the house while David was playing his lyre, as he usually did. And Saul had a spear in his hand, and he hurled it at him, saying to himself, "I'll pin David to the wall." But David eluded him twice. Did you get that? Twice. It wasn't like, "Oh, this spear slipped." He threw it twice at him. What brings us to number 2. Leaders in our life will hurl insults at us. Leaders in our life will hurl insults at us. They make themselves feel better by tearing us down. They will take advantage to hurl insults at us. "Oh my gosh, you wore that on the beach? I would never wear that." And you do a million things right to these people. A million things right. But the one wrong thing, they will never forget or never let you forget that one mistake you made in your relationship. Or a million things done right. One thing done bad. What are they going to bring up every time? The one bad thing. Before we move to number 3, I need to give us a little bit more of the background story to get you to understand more of this story. You see, the reward David got for killing Goliath was 2 things. The first thing he received was a lifetime exemption of paying taxes. Ooh, I could use a Goliath. A lifetime exemption from paying taxes. David, for the rest of his life, because he killed Goliath, never had to pay taxes in his life. The second thing David received was one of Saul's daughters to marry. Now, David was deeply in love with Saul's daughter, one of his daughters, deeply in love. And so he goes to Saul, and he says, "You know, Saul, I'm really loving not paying taxes, but I'm really in love with your daughter, and I would really like to marry her. I'm ready to do this. Let's keep this. Let's do this." So here is verse 24. Here is Saul's response to his soon-to-be son-in-law. When Saul's servant told him that what David said about wanting to marry, Saul said to David, "The king wants no other price for his bride than 100 Philistine foreskins to take revenge on his enemies." Saul's plan was to have David fall by the hands of the Philistines. What? And that's why we have kids on. I don't want kids asking you what foreskins are on the way home. But 100 Philistine foreskins. You see, Saul's plan was he knew David could never do that without getting himself killed. What brings us to number 3. Leaders will intentionally try to hurt you or set you up to fail. When it seems like in our life we are surrounded by people who are constantly and consistently hurting us, that is not okay. That is not the life God wants for you. Got anyone like that? kid, you're tougher than I thought. 100 Philistines, killed. Look, come on. Come on. You got me. He knew that David couldn't be king till he died. He made David the one who fought his battles for him. He made David his son-in-law. He made David his enemy. His enemy. You see, Saul had a huge opportunity to take this kid, David, in and make him his cohort. Saul could have secured his legacy with the people and in history of all time as the greatest king ever. If he would take David in. But he made his own family member his enemy. His number one enemy. Over the Philistines, over everyone else. He made David the bad guy. You see, Saul was a leader in David's life. So we got leaders. What about lifters? Here's where this story gets nutty. Crazy. Go back later this afternoon if you're bored, if the Cardinals are winning or losing. Read the first beginning, chapter 18. Your conversion. The crazy part about this is Jonathan. Jonathan was Saul's son. It's the total opposite of his father. You see, Jonathan was a lifter in the life of David. And we don't have time to go read all the scripture, but I just want to tell you, the minute they met, the minute Jonathan and David met, the first romance ever recorded in the Bible is right there. They had a connection. After Saul throws a spear at David, has him kill 10 Philistines, and when Saul tells all his sons to kill David, Jonathan goes and warns David to run. And David flees the palace and goes into hiding. So Jonathan, we find, has the characteristics of a lifter. Without going back and going through, this is quickly, to save time, this is how we identify the lifters in our life. Lifters are loyal, but loyal to righteousness and goodness. You see, when Jonathan witnessed all the bad things his father did to David, he was loyal not to his father, but to his friend. Jonathan was the heir to the throne. Get this, David's dead, Jonathan becomes king. He was the heir to the throne. If anyone had a vested interest in not being a lifter in David's life, it would have been Jonathan. He became a lifter the minute he met him. Number two, lifters always have our backs. They always have our backs. You see, it was one thing for Jonathan to go to David and say, hey dude, my dad's after you, you need to get out of town. But the story goes on that he went back to Saul and he tells his father, the king, the most powerful person at the time, to quit it. To stop. He calls him out. He says, Dad, what you're doing is wrong. He tells him to leave David alone. You see, Jonathan was using his leverage with his father. He was using his influence. He risked his own future for someone else. And that's what lifters do. So I ask you this morning rhetorically, who has lifted you up in your life? Who has had your back? Was it a spouse? Was it a teacher? Was it a coach? Was it a friend? Through the good times and the bad times, who in your life has consistently had your back? The third thing lifters do, they treat us like family. When Jonathan first meets David, the very first time when their romance starts, Jonathan gave David his clothes. He gave him his sword, he gave him his tunic. And in essence, Jonathan was saying, I want everyone to know the minute they see you that you are no longer a peasant. That this dirty shepherd boy from Bethlehem, that you are now royalty. That you are one of us. You see, Jonathan treated David like family. Who in your life has treated you like family? So it leaves us with several questions. Who are the leaders in your life? Who are the leaders in your life? And I know what some of you are thinking. Some of you you are thinking, hey, look, preacher smarty pants, I got family members. I've got family members who are leaders. I can't cut them out of my life. Do you know how much destruction it would take? Do you know how much my parents and other family members would think of me if I cut this person out of my life? I can't disown them. They're family. That's true. And I get that. I so get that. But you know what we can do? We can make a conscious effort to turn down the volume of their voice and influence over our hearts and our minds and our life. We don't have to disown them, but we can consciously turn down the volume where when they say something, it doesn't influence us. It doesn't hurt us. It doesn't affect the way we navigate through life's challenges. So you got any lifters? You got any lifters? If so, why not acknowledge them and say, you know what, thank you. Thank you. There's not a crisis going on. There's nothing going on. I am blessed in my life. But you know what? Thank you for always having my back. Thank you for always being there for me. Thank you for treating me like family and being there when I need someone. Which one are you? Are you a leader? Or are you a lifter? And you see, I so believe this morning. I feel so strongly, and I so believe this morning that there are many of us sitting here and hearing my voice. There are many of us who used to be lifters. But over time, we've become leaders. Over time, you know, once we were known as lifters in our office. We were known as soon as we hit the door, everyone lifted up. We lifted the spirits and the output. For some of us, we were lifters in our faith community, that every time we came in the church building, we picked people up and we helped them and we helped carry their box from one end to the other. And now over time, as time has eroded us, that I truly believe that once we were lifters and now we've become leaders. And if that's us, we need to say, God, I'm sorry. God, God, I am sorry. I need to be a lifter once again. I need to lift people up. I need to stop seeing that person as my enemy, but as my ally. You see, we have the power to lift someone else up. So why don't we take advantage of that? And if that's you, I pray today that you can commit to be a lifter to your spouse. That you can be a lifter to your children. You can be a lifter to your grandchildren and great-grandchildren. You can be a lifter to those that connect to this faith community. And there's no better time to start than now. Lifter, leader. Choice is yours.